Fantastic. So I'm really thrilled to share this session with like a lineup of wonderful papers. And I would like to start with the first one. I will drop the ball virtually to Dmitri. This is presenting with a video the work CARoma therapy, and we are ready.
Have you ever experienced road rage or felt angry while driving a car? I might have a solution for you. Hello, my name is Dmitrenko. I am a researcher at the Skylab and a teaching fellow at the University of Sussex. My paper is entitled CARoma Therapy, Pleasant Scents Promote Safer Driving, Better Mood and Improved Well-Being in Angry Drivers. We live in a fast-paced environment, and it is often difficult to avoid anger-eliciting situations, both on the road and before we actually get to the task of driving. Angry driving leads to road traffic accidents, and car manufacturers have developed a number of tools that help the driver avoid such situations. One of the examples for that is the lane departure warning system. Systems of this kind warn the driver mostly using audiovisual notifications. A recent marketing research study conducted by J.D. Power suggests that nearly a quarter of all drivers find such alerts annoying, and more than a half of them actually switch such alerts off. Academic research suggests that auditory stimuli may get annoying, visual warnings may cause distraction, and most efficient notifications are actually multimodal. Since using multiple modalities and multiple senses is the key, why not using the sense of smell to interact with the driver? What makes the sense of smell even more interesting is its very strong link to emotions and memories. But could olfactory stimuli help angry drivers too? To find an answer for this question, we have conducted the total of 4 studies. Prior to study number 1, we went to a science fair and asked participants to sniff and rate a set of 11 different scents. We then used this data to extract 4 scents for further validation. We expected each of these scents to occupy one and only one quadrant of the 2-dimensional valence and arousal space. In the positive valence low arousal quadrant, we found rose. In the positive valence high arousal quadrant, we found peppermint. In the negative valence high arousal quadrant, we found civet and patchouli. But in the negative valence low arousal quadrant, we found nothing. Consequently, we decided to avoid negative valence low arousal scents and only focus on the scents of rose, peppermint, and civet. For the control condition, we used water as a neutral stimulus. For the study number 2, we decided to use photos from the International Affective Picture System as a set of anger-eliciting stimuli. We then asked our participants to rate how angry these pictures make them feel on a 7-point Likert scale. We found a statistically significant effect of pictures on the anger ratings and chose 3 most highly rated pictures as stimuli that would elicit anger in participants before they start the task of driving. In the study number 3, we investigated stimuli that would make the participants angry also while they are performing the task of driving. To tackle this challenge, we created a set of 12 on-road events that could potentially elicit anger in participants. We then asked our participants to drive through a course in which they would experience all 12 of these stimuli. Our participants were divided into 2 groups. The first group would only perform the task of driving, but the second group would be exposed to the anger-eliciting pictures from the study number 2 before they start the task of driving. After having completed the driving task, participants were asked to rate each of the 12 on-road events. As the ratings from the second group were higher, we decided to use them for the next stage. From this group, we selected 4 events that had the highest anger rating. Let me now show you how these events looked like. In the study number 4, we used all the results that I have just presented to conduct a simulated driving experiment in which we studied the effects of scents on the drivers in an induced angry state. The results on the self-reported emotions demonstrated that the participants' emotional state was in the positive valence low arousal quadrant before the start of the experiment. However, after having viewed the IAPS pictures, their emotional state moved to the negative valence high arousal quadrant, and this shift was also statistically significant. This means that participants were in an induced angry state before they started the task of driving. In the driving simulator, we used a large 55-inch screen to visualize the road. We then had a smaller screen underneath to visualize the dashboard. We delivered the scents using plastic tubes, and the delivery nozzle was located just behind the steering wheel. Now, let me show you how participants performed when exposed to an unpleasant scent. As we have seen in this example, a participant who was exposed to a scent of civet was hesitating quite a lot, which finally led to an accident. And now, let me show you how participants performed when exposed to a pleasant scent. In this example, however, a participant who was exposed to a scent of rose appeared to be much calmer and passed the critical event with confidence without causing any accident. The results of this study suggest that those participants who were exposed to the pleasant scents of rose and peppermint experienced significantly fewer collisions than participants who were exposed to the unpleasant scent of civet and those in the control condition. We also found that the scent of rose resulted in significantly higher comfort ratings than in the case of civet. Overall, the scent of rose led to the highest comfort and liking ratings among all conditions, although these differences were not significant. As you might remember, after the procedure of inducing anger in participants with the help of IAPS pictures, the self-reported emotional state of participants was mapped onto the negative valence and high arousal quadrant. After having completed the driving task, the participants in the rose and the peppermint conditions experienced a shift of their emotional state towards the positive valence and high arousal quadrant. Participants in the civet condition remained in the negative valence and high arousal quadrant, with their arousal level going up. Participants in the control condition also experienced a positive change. However, the valence of their emotional state remained on the border between the positive and the negative sides. This means that the emotional state of participants in the rose and peppermint conditions improved despite all the anger-eliciting events. In the control condition, the emotional state remained neutral, but in the civet condition, it only got worse. Our findings on the effects of scents on the driving behavior go in line with the related work, confirming that unpleasant scents lead to degraded driving performance, whereas pleasant scents help the overstimulated angry drivers calm down. Similar results have been found in the context of auditory stimulation, where it was found that music helps improve the driving performance only if the driving task is understimulating. When it comes to the effects of scents on the emotions and well-being, then the interviews conducted in the scope of our project have confirmed that there are interpersonal differences in the preferences of scents. For example, some participants might choose the scent of peppermint instead of rose as a relaxing stimulus because they associate it with refreshing and relaxing experiences. This could be easily addressed with the use of customizable olfactory interfaces. We have also seen that positive scents undoubtedly contribute to the well-being of the driver. However, a recent interview with a perfumer working in the automotive industry suggests that an in-car scent needs to be unbiased. This means that if we go for peppermint, for example, we might need to use it as a base note for a more complex blend of odorants. For the conclusion, I would like to highlight the significance of our work. According to NHTSA, 1/3 of all road traffic accidents are linked to anger. This means that reducing anger is a very important task. Pleasant scents could help us make angry drivers calmer, but we still require further studies with more participants, on-road tests, and a bigger sample of scents. Thanks for listening to my presentation. For regular updates on this topic, don't forget to follow me on Twitter.
Great, thank you very much, Dmitry, for the great video. And we have a question. So I'm going to read a question for you, Dmitry. I'm sure you can see it as well. Let me look. What do you think about the difference between the different scents you use in your work? This is a question from Pedro. Maybe Pedro wanna take the control and speak out. I can unmute you if you prefer. Brilliant. So we keep it a bit more natural interaction.
Yeah, if you don't mind. This was really
Absolutely
cool talk, Dmitry.
Thanks,
I was wondering, when you found those differences between you know, the smell of rose and the cooling peppermint and everything, what do you think is the underlying explanation? I mean, you hinted at different things, but it's hard for sure to know what the main driving factor is. But I'm curious what your intuition tells you that it is. And I'm also wondering, because you had several references for the emotional valence of all those, and you think that's a priori thing? I enter the car already knowing that for me, this smell has this valence, this has this valence, or can that change in the context of that task?
I think valence is something that varies among individuals, because even very pleasant scents are sometimes associated with negative experiences. Perhaps you happen to smell this particular scent when something bad happened, and then you are conditioned to associate it with negative valence. But arousal is something that works in a more stable way across participants, I would say. Coming back to the first part of your question, I think, yeah, valence and arousal of sense is what helped us achieve these results. And I think it's a good choice to pick one good representative from each quadrant, yeah, that led us to having rose as, you know, as a calm, as a low arousal positive valence scent that is resulting in also calming and soothing experiences and fewer collisions. I think that was the key. But as I said earlier, the valence is something that could also change. For example, I mentioned the case with peppermint. Someone said that for them, peppermint is actually not aroused, but not positive valence, high arousal, but something that is actually soothing, because, you know, mint candies are rich, and people like to connect them with some relaxing experiences. Also, perhaps you drink a mojito and it's relaxing for you, not really arousing. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. So the timeline is kind of restricting somehow, so we have just a few minutes after each presentation. But what I'm going to do, I'm taking all the questions directly to Dmitry, and we can take it after, when there is the plenary discussion, and eventually we can also take it offline to the single speakers. So I'm collecting the question from Miguel, Karen, from Moses, Henry, and we will keep track of that, and we come back at the end of every presentation, so we cannot kind of miss the timing of the overall symposium. So thank you again, Dmitry. It was fantastic, and it was a pleasure to see you virtually.
Thanks,
I will now, yeah, great. So we can then move on for the next talk. So we have a fascinating title presented by Andrea, Scent and Sensibility. So we are ready.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a PhD student at the University of Maryland, and I'm going to be talking about a CHI 2020 paper, Sense and Sensibility, Evaluating Information Olfactation, that I co-authored with Biswax and Pitnaik, Moses Akazu, and Nicholas Elmquist. Information olfactation is the idea that we can use smell to represent abstract information. Why would we want to do that? Well, we can use smell to transmit information without requiring the user's visual attention, if they need to be looking somewhere else, like while they're driving, for example. And this also applies to situations where the user can't see. Another application is in instances of slow-moving data or gradual processes, things that change slowly in real time but represent an overarching pattern that's relevant to a work process, like the hourly changes in a stock market set of indicators. So to start off, we should be clear on what, in general, information olfactation is. So it's the design space and implementation of displays that use smell to convey abstract information. That's information without a natural spatial mapping, like the price of a particular stock, students' grades in a class, or the major that that student is enrolled in. So in a study like ours, where we're evaluating information olfactation, we want to know not only if we can exploit the human olfactory system to convey features of data, we want to know how well we can do it and using what techniques. So I should belabor the point here before we move on that we're talking specifically about abstract information. We're not talking about, say, adding the smell of baking bread to a VR scene that's set in a bakery to enhance immersion. We're talking about representing data through smells in a way that supports data analysis. For example, making an increase in the Dow smell like mint, while a downturn smells like a lemon. And we introduced the concept of information olfactation in our 2019 TVCG theoretical paper, and our main contributions there were in our task taxonomy, in our definition of a design space for olfactation, and in the prototype BizSent 1.0 that we built for the study. So I should give a little bit more detail on this as the background of our current work to demonstrate how this fits in together. Starting with our task taxonomy. So there were 5 broad task types in our taxonomy, and for each one of these I'm going to give a sort of natural mapping example just to illustrate what I mean. So information recall is sort of like when a smell brings you back to a childhood memory, for example. A smell can assist with information recall by having these associative memory bindings. Object localization and tracking is, for example, a bloodhound helping the hunter to track a fox. Feature detection and discrimination, for example, picking out nuances in the bouquet of your favorite wine. Temporal reasoning could be when you smell something new in your surroundings. And associative reasoning, which tends to be cross-modal. So it's been indicated that the scent of lemon, for example, makes people think of sharp and angular shapes. And that's what I mean by cross-modal here. So for our study, we decided to focus on feature detection and discrimination. And as a part of our design space, we introduced these 3 olfactory mark types. We have simple smell glyphs and the fragrance classes into which they fall. We have molecular bouquet or complex glyphs that cross classes. And we have airburst, which is sort of a pseudo mark that's part mark, part substrate or medium of conveyance. And because scent is so heavily cross-modal, the perception of smells depends not just on the chemical composition of the air, but also its aspects of the medium that it's conveyed to you on. Now, for the study that we conducted, we decided that it would be most appropriate to limit ourselves to evaluating the performance of discrimination tasks using only modifications of the simple glyphs and the airburst, so we drop our molecular bouquet. And when I say modifying it, I mean we use these different olfactory channels to change the way, change the smells that people are experiencing. So we have these 5 channels: direction, scent intensity, air flow rate, the qualities of the air like temperature or humidity, and the pattern of the mark or the smell that the user is exposed to. which is sort of like a meta channel, and then it allows us to vary the composition of the smells that the user is experiencing. So evaluating these channels was the primary focus of this study. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about our study design, which I should point out was pre-registered on OSF, which is a best practice for open and transparent methodology. And you can check out our pre-registered plan by going to the page on the screen here. So as I said, evaluating our olfactory channels was the primary focus of this study. We decided that we would be using a desktop display for our user session since it was the most practical and the least invasive approach. But the technical requirements of implementing this without a head-mounted display were onerous enough that we restricted our evaluation to our other 4 channels only. So we have our scent intensity, the airflow rate of the airburst, pattern, and specifically the scent type that's used, and qualities of the air. So specifically, we focused on temperature. And these 4 channels represent elements of our first experimental factor here. So we have one experimental factor. You probably guessed that we also have a second factor here that is the type of information that the user is trying to make sense of. So each task used an olfactory channel to represent data that was either quantitative or ordinal or nominal. And in other words, the user had 4 channels and 3 different types of data that they needed to explore all combinations of. And we wanted to repeat each trial that the user experienced several times to account for individual variations. So we have 36 trials per participant to answer our research question, which is namely how effective these channels are at conveying these types of information to the user. So who are our participants and what did we actually ask them to do and how did we support them in doing it? Well, we had 20 paid student participants aged 22 to 30 years old, and 12 of them identified as men, 8 as women. And we should talk about the apparatus. This is our how did we support them. And now in our theory paper, we introduced a prototype called VizSen 1.0. Of course, we just called it VizSen at the time, but we've since developed a brand new prototype, VizSen 2.0, for the purpose of this study. This is an olfactory display system that was designed specifically to evaluate our research questions. So VizSen 2.0 uses 24 different fragrance pods to vary the scent type and the intensity. It uses 3 airflow fans with variable speeds. It uses a Peltier module and a heating coil for temperature control. We used ultrasonic diffusers to vaporize the solutions of aromatic oil and water with varying fragrance and oil concentrations. This system was controlled by a tower that we built using an Arduino Mega microcontroller that we flashed with our C++ sketch and an application that we wrote in C# and Unity. The control tower walked the user through the experiment, first presenting them with a tutorial and then asking them 3 questions per experimental factor combination. Once participants were introduced to the study, they began the sessions with blocks of experimental factor combinations, so a combination of 1 olfactory channel and 1 data type that were randomly selected by VizSen 2.0. The system then played them a tutorial demonstration and afterward asked the user questions about randomly selected observations in a synthetic data set. The participants were run through 3 repetitions where they had to answer a question about the data. And after they submitted their answer, they gave a Likert value response for how certain they were about their answer. After 3 repetitions, the system either randomly selected another block of an experimental factor combination, channel and type, or if there were no combinations left, the participants exited the experiment. Users were asked questions like the one shown here, and they could respond to quantitative questions by moving the continuous slider, ordinal questions by moving a slider that snapped to the nearest value, and nominal questions by clicking on the button. The data that we used to evaluate task performance were Likert scale, self-reported confidence scores after each trial, a Boolean measure of whether the answer was correct or not, the magnitude of the error, where that was applicable. And these errors were normalized around a mean of 0, and also the amount of time that it took the users to respond to each question. We had 3 main predictions about how our experiment would turn out. First, we expected that users would have a better correctness when interpreting nominal data using the sent type channel relative to their use of other channels. And second, we expected that participants would have lower errors interpreting ordinal and quantitative data using sent intensity than they would using other channels. And finally, we expected that participants would have higher errors interpreting ordinal and quantitative data using the sent class channel or the sent type than they would using other channels. So let's talk about our results. If we look at the effects of different data types as a factor for user task completion, the error size and the correctness differences are negligible. There's also very little difference in the Likert scale responses to confidence. And the participants did take slightly longer to answer questions about ordinal data, but overall, there's very little difference across these different data types when taken in aggregate. Now, the result that we were most interested in were the effects of our different channels on the normalized error, on the correctness, and on the completion time or response speed for the questions the users answered about the data. We found that the error was higher for sent intensity in both ordinal and quantitative data, significantly so for the ordinal data. For quantitative data, we found that temperature had the best, that is to say the lowest error size, and it had a fairly tight distribution around the mean. Sent type had a higher error for quantitative data than the airflow rate or the temperature. Within our correctness measure, we found that sent type performed significantly better than the other channels for ordinal data, while sent intensity had a lower, that's to say worse, correctness than the other channels for ordinal data. Finally, we found that participants responded fastest to our questions based on changes in the airflow rate for all of the data types, while modifying temperature resulted in slightly longer completion times. And once again, that is for all of the data types. So in terms of confidence, the users felt generally more confident for the channels that had direct effect on the medium of conveyance, that is to say the air burst, than they did on the channels that directly affected the scent in the air, the scent type or the scent intensity. But most of the trials, the users felt a fairly high level of confidence about their answers. We also asked them about their experience. Participants found that our display was fun to use, and they thought that it was easy to adjust to using olfactory channels to interpret data once they got the hang of it, but there was a bit of a learning curve, and they felt that it wasn't very efficient. And that speaks to our notion of olfactation being a good medium for representing slow data. That's data that represents overarching themes or gradual processes. So we prefaced our results by mentioning a few predictions, and there were 2 main surprises for us in our results. First, the scent intensity did worse than we expected. We thought that scent intensity would be the best channel for interpreting quantitative data, but it turned out to be the worst channel for all data types. Second, we were surprised at how well scent type, or that is to say the pattern channel, performed. And we thought that it would be the worst channel for ordinal and quantitative data, but it wasn't. In fact, it was the best channel for ordinal data. And we predicted that it would be the best for nominal data, and that prediction did wind up being true. So to recap, we evaluated our theory of information olfactation. We built a really cool-looking olfactory display system to do it. And independent of our olfactory channels, we saw very little difference between the user error, the correctness, or the completion time by data type alone. But when we evaluated our channels as factors, we saw that temperature outperformed the other channels for quantitative data, while scent type beat the other channels for ordinal data and nominal data. And that is our study. Thank you for watching. You can check out a preprint of the full paper at the link on the bottom of the screen, along with anonymized user data and all of our pre-registration materials.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Very, very interesting presentation and work. Congratulations, first of all. I see that Andrea already started to answer some questions directly in the chat. Also, Dimitri is doing that. It's fantastic, so we can keep track of the question in this way. But as Pedro said, please keep asking questions. We will answer at some point, if at the end of all the presentation, or even like we can take this kind of one-to-one discussion with the presenter. There are any other questions directly to Andrea, so we can, I see Carlos was asking a question about the type of information, and Andrea already answered. Andrea, do you want to add something to the comment?
Sure. If you're talking about the, there's a second question about different levels of compatibility between data set types and analysis, and how we would control for habituation. So I guess I'll respond to that, or what? All right. The habituation was a factor that we considered when we were designing our prototype, and there's evidence from empirical cognitive psychology and neuroscience that there's habituation after about 8 to 9 seconds of exposure to an olfactory stimuli. So we designed our user sessions such that the user would be exposed to the stimuli for that period of time, that 8 to 9 seconds, and then it would be cut off. And then before they were exposed to another stimuli, they would be forced to wait at least that period of time before being exposed to another fragrance or olfactory channel combination.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much. I think there are other questions. One I found interesting as well from Joe Fish is like, did you measure in somehow how cold was the stimuli? If you're like a kind of a measure that is not just a self-report, so can you quantify the coldness?
We did, and that information is available in the supplemental data that we've submitted along with our paper, and that should also be in our OSF materials page.
Fantastic. Andrea, I can leave you to answer the other question. They are direct to you, and I see also some questions that are more generic, but again, keep asking questions and we'll come back in the end of all the presentation. Thank you again, Andrea. Very fascinating research again. Now we are moving to the next paper is on-phase olfactory interfaces, and Judy will present with a video, but she will then be with us afterwards.
Hello everyone. Today I'll be presenting on-phase olfactory interfaces, which are miniaturized wearable devices that release a smell and that can be worn on the face. My name is Judith Amores, and this project was a collaboration with Yan and Wang, who equally contributed to this research. We worked together on this project at the MIT Media Lab with my advisor, Pai Mais. We're both PhD students graduating this year, this upcoming year. She'll be graduating from the Zhejiang University in China. On-face wearables are currently limited to piercings, tattoos, or interactive makeup, but they have been minimally used for stand delivery methods. However, they could provide an advantage, especially for personal stand delivery in comparison with other modalities or body locations, since they are closer to the nose. Perfume is commonly worn in everyday life. However, the design of wearable smell-enhanced technologies is still underexplored. Most of the olfactory displays in human-computer interaction are stationary, and few are wearable. Here we showcase the wearable ones that we have found. A few researchers and designers have tried to create face-located stand delivery wearables. Some pioneers have developed head-mounted displays with wearable stand delivery, like the work by Yamada et al. In 2006. This is the image on the top left corner. using smell in the outdoor environment, or Choi and colleagues in 2015 with Sound Perfume, which is a pair of 3D printed glasses embedded with a heating module for releasing smell and at the end of the frames. And then we also have Miriam Simund. She's an artist that created an artistic and an analog version of a design that can be attached to the face as well. And then we also have Narumi et al. Presented in CAE 2015, a head-mounted display that augments flavors and also, taste, using edible markers for augmented reality. There's been other research as well that has focused on wearable necklaces or clips, like Essence in 2017 and Bioessence that also releases smell according to your physiological signals. And then we also have Incense in 2017 that uses smell as an amplification for mobile notifications. However, although these devices are targeted to the user's nose, they are relatively far away from it. Therefore, when the devices are being used in public, such in public spaces or during social interactions, others might be able to notice it. And then in some cases, this can be beneficial, but in the case of our research, we focus on specific scenarios where the user prefers to release scent in a personal and in a private way. The impact of smell in a social context has been explored in the past. Researchers have shown how ambient scents can significantly increase the number of social interactions and encourage pro-social behavior like helping someone. There is also even studies that show how it can increase the cleaning behavior or subliminally guiding social likability judgments. Some researchers like Dunn et al. Presented theoretical frameworks to understand how wearable products are perceived and evaluated in a social context. The social aspects of wearability are especially relevant when designing devices that are worn on the face. Chuang Wen and some of colleagues studied the social impact of non-traditional form factors such as on-skin interfaces located at the collarbone, ears, back of the neck, arms, forearms, and hands. Researchers and designers have for decades explored how digital technologies can be worn, minimizing weight and size, and experimenting with a variety of form factors. And the first question is where to wear the device. This might be the very first question to be answered. We focus on the face, as it is the closest body part that it's close to the nose, basically, and worthy of exploring when designing olfactory interfaces. And as far as we're aware, little work in the area of on-face olfactory interfaces has been done so far. So in this paper, we present the mechanical and industrial design details of a series of form factors for on-face olfactory wearables that are lightweight and can be adhered to the skin or attached to glasses or piercings. We aim to create a personal, close to the nose olfactory display, which can release scent directly to the wearer's nose by shortening the scent delivery, the distance basically, through a lightweight and a fashionable or also provocative wearable for everyday use. That we design can be worn in different ways, as you've seen in the video. They can be attached to your skin as a piercing or even in head-mounted displays. The prototype consists in mainly three parts. One is the olfactory display, which is the part that is attached to your skin. The other is a custom PCB that is based in the previous work of Bioessence that we've shown before, and then an Android app that connects to the device via Bluetooth Low Energy, and that can release very, very short amounts of scent. Here you can see a rendering of the olfactory display. We custom-made the 3D printed holder, we painted with golden leaf and other types of materials to make it look more like jewelry. It contains a small piezoelectric, it's like about 10 millimeters, and this vibrates at high frequency, about 108 kilohertz. And we used a custom Teflon tube that serves as the liquid container. This usually it's like a bottle, a glass container, but we used Teflon so it's more lightweight and also comfortable to use on your skin. And the prototype can be used with any kind of liquid that is not very viscous. We usually recommend hydrosols or skin-friendly materials. We also custom-made the cotton filter that is in contact with this liquid. We created a modular design so users can customize it based on their preferences. The device can release up to about 524 bursts of smell every 30 milliseconds of scent. So this is about 8 hours, and the average height of the burst is about 12 centimeters. So the olfactory display is connected to this case that contains the PCB and is also worn on the ear. It has this on and off button, and then that you can charge the device through a micro USB. And here we can see the cable that connects to the PCB. On the left is the cable with a real golden chain. On the right, the cable alone. And on the bottom, embedded in a decorative tattoo as well. So this cable transmits the power to the piezo. So it's actually very important for the design. We created a lot of different designs, form factors, and iterations depending on where the device needs to be located. For example, under the mouth, for olfactory interfaces, on a lot of different places. There are two different ways of holding the piezoelectric, as you can see, depending on the prototype as well, so A and B. The designs were made in Rhino 3D. We 3D printed them at the lab, and we curated them under UV. They are modular and you can easily assemble them. And the user can customize the decorative piezo cover on the top, as you've seen before. And also, as you can see here in this video, showcasing the design B, which is the one we use in our final prototypes and our user study. Some of the design considerations that we took into account are the miniaturization of the device, the social acceptance and the placement of the prototype, the aesthetics, how the user might perceive the smell, and also the skin-friendly fragrances. Previous researchers have explored the use of scent delivery necklace for notifications in public, but the effects on people nearby have not been really studied. Doublestein et al. With Incent wrote that in their study, bystanders did not show an indication of perceiving scents, but unfortunately the distance from participants and their perception of the other was not reported in the paper. So in this paper, we aim at understanding if on-face olfactory interfaces such as glasses or on-skin prototypes could provide an advantage for personal scent delivery in contrast to off-face designs such as these scent delivery necklaces. We conducted a usability study to understand how participants felt while wearing the prototypes, as well as to evaluate if these devices were private enough that a person at a close distance could not perceive that smell. So in order to compare these, the first that we had to do was to create the necklace or the off-face prototype. So here is a video of the necklace. So this has the PCB on the back part, similar to the Essence Olfactory necklace from 2017. We looked into the usability of 3 prototypes by testing with 12 participants in a within-subject study design while they were interacting in pairs at a close personal distance. We compared 2 of these designs with the off-face olfactory necklace shown in the video, and then we evaluated their social acceptance, comfort, as well as perceived odor intensity for both the wearer and observer, as you can see here in the picture. Here we can see some videos of the study while wearing the nose prototype on the left, and then the glasses prototype on the right. So the results show that participants found the nose prototype the least socially acceptable and also the least comfortable, followed by the glasses prototype, which they were more comfortable wearing, and they also found more socially acceptable than even the necklace, which seems that it was on average the one that people preferred the most. Here are the results of the perceived sensations. So on the right, we can see when they were wearing the device, so the wearers, and on the left, when they were seeing another person wearing the device, so the observer. So if we look on the left, the average observer did not smell any of the prototypes, but the wearer did in the three cases, so in the three different prototypes, the necklace, the glasses, and the nose, pretty much equally. So in the case of the visual burst, the observers saw moderately weak bursts coming from the nose prototype, and also weak from the glasses and very weak to none from the necklace. They did not feel any moist, and while some of the wearers weakly felt humidity. Some participants heard the weak burst coming out of the prototype in the case of the glasses and the nose, but not in the necklace. So against the hypothesis, there is no significant difference between the odor intensity perceived while wearing an off-face and an on-face prototype. But there is a highly significant difference between the odor smell by the wearers and the observers. So therefore, the data suggests that all three designs might be suitable for personal scent delivery without being perceived by people nearby. So this is obviously a small number of participants, so further research is needed. There are a lot of envisioned applications, from a drug delivery device, instead of using nasal cannulas or masks, to deliver a small amount of liquid medicine or hormones such as oxytocin directly to the nostrils throughout the day and night, lavender essential oil to reduce pain perception and bring calmness, for example, while giving birth. This has been studied in some previous papers as well. And these devices could be used to augment culinary experiences by releasing bursts of scent very close to the mouth when you're eating, for example. They could also be used while studying, driving, or interacting with other people. So to summarize, our main contributions are the following. Number one is the design of various form for face located olfactory displays. Then the implementation of these prototypes, including mechanical and industrial design, explorations of form factors, aesthetics, space locations, as well as the technical tests of lasting time. A user study comparing the usability, the social acceptance, and personal scent experience of on-face olfactory wearables in comparison with an off-face one. And finally, a discussion and design considerations for future on-face olfactory interfaces. Thank you very much. Feel free to check our website, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. Amazing presentation and also fascinating research area. And you really develop in your team a nice, beautiful object, first of all, because it's really nice, and you had done kind of an incredible design implementation as well. I see you already been like answering some questions directly in the chat, and it's interesting how to see this kind of common theme in between all the presentation is how the smell is changing over time, or how different scents have different chemical properties that therefore can have different behaviors. So it's interesting to see how you already answer, I think, about this question. What is really fascinating to me is this kind of application for pro-social behavior changes or reducing of pain. I have a commercial question more oriented. And what about, so you have this tiny cotton bud, so you need to change cotton bud in all the system for each sense, or you are trying to see if you can keep components in somehow reusable. What do you think? I'm sure you've been thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually a bit of a pain to do this every time because we actually custom made them. So you have to cut them very precisely. You have to prepare for the user study so many of them. But I mean, yeah, you really need to change the cotton filter. I think like ideally every time that you do a user study, you would change it depending on the participant. And then you can always manufacture, you know, this kind of like specific cotton filters or make them yourself. Or like maybe there could be a way to have like capsules that you can easily change or replace. But definitely
like pre-stocked.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It is one of the most challenging things, to be honest, I think, especially because, for example, there was one question about Dmitry was asking if the smells evaporate, and this is also like a challenge in general because they don't evaporate, but the cotton filter gets soaked with the liquid, and if you have it, let's say, for a month there, I mean, it will still be there, and it's kind of gonna be kind of gross, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and also over time, all the smell are changing. There was a question previously as well, like at the beginning, even a complex mixture of smell can evolve and change, like with different top note, middle note, and this kind of varying. And this kind of a main challenge in working with smell, as all of us knows, and is kind of fascinating somehow, because maybe you can discover that the citrus smell will change completely, but as you say, there are like technical challenges for sure. And I think also the Teflon tube is fantastic because it's odorless, so it doesn't absorb anything, and you can use it for several uses. But the cotton bud is the kind of the point to exchange or have this pre-soaked, and then you can really just plug in, plug out for different usage, or even the same user can have different smell for different circumstances. This is fantastic. I will then go on, and I thank you again very much, Judith, and so nice to meet all of you finally. I mean, even if virtually, but it's to see all the smell people in the same moment, in the same time, so it's fantastic. Brilliant, thank you again. So let's move on to our last presentation, and our host, Jas, he will present Trigeminal-Based temperature illusions.
Hey everyone, my name is Jas Brooks, and today I'll be talking about how to create temperature sensations using a special nerve in our body called the trigeminal nerve. This work was done in collaboration with my colleague Stephen Noggles and my advisor Pedro Lopez. We'd also like to thank the CHI community for our Best Paper Award. We appreciate the gesture enormously. So, I'll be talking about how this user is actually able to feel the temperature of the virtual scene using a low-powered device that we create specifically for that effect. This work is largely motivated by how virtual reality has become increasingly realistic. Here I whipped up two different scenes, and they're both fairly photorealistic already. Alongside this kind of visual realism, industry and researchers have been exploring other modes of realism, like touch, force feedback, odors, or even rendering the temperature of virtual scenes. Now, I'll be going over how researchers and industry have been doing this kind of like thermal feedback for these devices. The most evident way to do this is via heat lamps or air conditioning units, which essentially change the temperature of a large volume of air, and VR arcade setups like the VR Sense, in fact, use this kind of technique. Unfortunately, they require a lot of energy. So it kind of runs contrary to what virtual reality is moving towards, which is mostly untethered devices. In fact, VR's biggest impact and promise are in like home setups or fully portable setups, like the Oculus Quest on the left, the Oculus Go on the left, and the Oculus Quest on the right. Nowadays, researchers have actually been miniaturizing this kind of thermal feedback and even putting some devices inside of the headset to create those sensations. Oftentimes, they use something called thermoelectric materials, or Peltier elements. Now, what's nice about these is that they can be really small. And the way they function is when you put a current through it, it creates a temperature difference across the surface. One side gets hot and the other side gets cold. Unfortunately, to sustain that temperature difference, you need an equivalent amount of power. So they can get small, but they usually remain tethered. So let's take thermo-VR, for example. If you wanted to create a 10-minute full cold scene for the VR environment, you would have to take 10 of the Peltiers in the device, each put them at -3 degrees Celsius, and then sustain that for 10 minutes. Each one would take about 0.5 amp hours, which means the whole thing is going to take approximately 5 amp hours. And that's already 1.5 times your phone's battery life. So you're starting to get the problem that's happening right now. And our goal is basically, can we actually create these sensations without using lots of power? Which probably means that we can't use a technique that's bounded by physics. In fact, our approach is relying on thermal illusion, in which we chemically actuate our senses. For this, we focus on the chemical senses that we have, in particular the ones in our nose. Now, most people are probably familiar with the tongue for tasting, or the olfactory bulb for smelling things. But there's a third nerve in our head called the trigeminal nerve. And most people aren't familiar with this, but they actually experience it at the same time as tasting and smelling things. So if you've ever had something spicy or bubbly or refreshing, those kinds of sensations are actually the trigeminal nerve responding. Now, this nerve responds to mechanical deformation, so like tactile stimuli, as well as having receptors to respond to temperature stimuli. So if you go outside at -10 degrees Celsius in the Chicago winter, and you breathe in the cold, crisp air that you're feeling, in fact, that's the trigeminal nerve responding. And what's pretty neat about this is that these receptors not only respond to temperature, but also to chemical stimuli, which makes you wonder, can we actually create all these sensations only with chemical stimuli? So here we're focusing on two particular receptors, one that's called TRPV1, that's temperature gated, aka it starts firing off and responding to things once the temperature in the tissue is around 45 degrees Celsius and above, which is very hot for the body. And then the TRPM8, which is a cold receptor that responds to temperatures in the body that's 25 degrees Celsius and below. Now, these two receptors also respond to things found commonly in plants, like capsaicin in chilies or mint and menthol. And we were interested in seeing if we could use already available essential oils, as well as easily accessible chemical compounds to create these kinds of temperature sensations in virtual reality. So the first thing we did was implement a prototypical thermal display, which in our case is in fact an olfactory display. Here, we're using a phone to wirelessly communicate with it and actuate it. And the device includes a Bluetooth microcontroller for wireless communication, micro pumps to pump around all the liquids, 1 milliliter reservoirs for each compound, and then a vibrating mesh atomizer to create an aerosol. This lets us do things like emit capsaicin to create a warming sensation. And all we have to do for that is pump some of the liquids from one reservoir out to the mesh, as well as do things like using eucalyptal to create a cooling sensation, or even output mixtures, something like capsaicin with a smell. So we could do temperature plus odors. Now, two problems we had to take into consideration were the following. The first one was that capsaicin doesn't evaporate at the same temperature as alcohol. In fact, it kind of sediments and crystallizes. So we couldn't do evaporation, which is a pretty common feature in olfactory displays. Instead, we had to keep everything in liquid phase, aka we had to create an aerosol of tiny droplets. To do this, we ended up using a vibrating mesh transducer, which creates the aerosolization. Second, because we're only using one atomizer, we run the risk of creating cross-contamination between the channels. You wouldn't want like eucalyptol and capsaicin to run at the same time unless you specifically wanted that for some reason. To avoid this, what we did was have each channel have its own reservoir, set of pumps. Well, each channel has its own reservoir, tubing, and set of pumps. On top of that, we added capillary tubes at the end of the tubing at the contact point for the atomizer. What this allows is when the micropump creates droplets, the atomizer quickly gets the droplet and then atomizes it. So there's not going to be any lingering liquids. But the capillary tubes serve a secondary purpose where, because they constrict the flow so much, there's no backflow. So if you create a droplet, it's not going to like flow back into another channel's tube. Finally, we also made it so that these reservoirs are pretty easily accessible. So you can take one out, refill it, or even swap it with another compound. The device is pretty interesting on its own in that when you render temperatures, it only costs about 0.25 watts. That's a stark contrast to Peltier elements, which may take like 50 watts or more. So in our user studies, the first thing we were asking ourselves was which stimulants were best to create these hot and cold sensations. We ended up looking through medical and olfactory literature to find first 3 warm candidates, including thymol, a cayenne pepper tincture, which is in our case capsaicin, and I'll be referring to it that way from now on, and then methyl salicylate. Additionally, we chose 3 cool candidates, linalool, eucalyptal, and peppermint essential oil, of which the last one has a lot of menthol in it. We have to also note that methyl salicylate and linalool actually activate a mixture of warm and cool TRP channels. For a baseline in this kind of study, what we ended up using was the solvents, what we used to dilute all these kinds of compounds. In this case, ethanol, aka Everclear, for us. So participants inhaled 1 microliter of these compounds and then had to rate their perceived temperature sensation. First, we found that linalool and methyl salicylate both elicited a large range of different temperature sensations. And that lines up pretty well with the fact that they both actuate cool and warm TRP channels. We then found that peppermint essential oil and thymol are actually the strongest perceived temperature sensations. Unfortunately, they're both not only smellable, so like if it's in the air, you know there's something that you're smelling, but readily recognizable. So if you smell peppermint essential oil, you'll probably recognize that it's minty or that it's probably just peppermint. Unfortunately, what we're looking for in this case is our compounds that not only elicit the temperature sensations, but also are not very recognizable, so they don't break the temperature illusion. Luckily, eucalyptal and capsaicin fit this criteria very well. Despite being smellable, eucalyptal was not readily recognizable by most people in the study. Additionally, capsaicin is odorless on its own. Finally, people were able to distinguish these kinds of temperature sensations with only 1 microliter of volume. That's incredibly small, meaning that we can use very small quantities of eucalyptal and capsaicin to create the kind of temperature illusions that we wanted. We then tested these temperature illusions in VR. Participants were placed in a VR scene, either a hot desert or a cold mountain, and then either represented a baseline, aka the solvent again, or the temperature congruent trigeminal stimulus. So in the case of the cold mountain, it would either be ethanol for the baseline or menthol for its trigeminal stimulant. What we found is that the temperature illusion held up. So in the cold mountain case, it was actually much colder with menthol included. And then in the hot desert section, when you included capsaicin, you actually created largely warm sensations. So this ended up confirming that these trigeminal stimulants with visually congruent environments actually creates the thermal illusion still. So we ended up taking these results alongside our prototype and created a full experience for them. So here, a user is warming up at the furnace inside of a random cabin in the woods. And we render the warmth of the furnace via capsaicin, which activates the TRPV1 channel in the trigeminal nerve, creating an odorless warming sensation. Then, because of a storm, a power outage comes out, which cuts off all the electricity and the heat. Now, because of the cold winds coming in, we end up emitting eucalyptal to create a cooling sensation via the TRPM8 channel of the trigeminal nerve. Because it's cold, the user goes outside to try and find the emergency electric generator. And because it's colder outside, we actually emit eucalyptal more frequently. They then find the emergency generator, switch it on, which then provides a bit of heat, so we add in some capsaicin, and go a step further and throw in a rubbery odor to create kind of like the sensation of burning fuel. And our device here is doing not only temperature, but also mixing in odors. So now that the power is back on, they're going to go back inside and stay warm. And on their way in, they turn around and close the door. At this point, we stop the eucalyptal, since there's not much cold air coming in anymore, and instead start emitting capsaicin again. At which point they can go warm up at the furnace again. Now, to conclude, we introduced a new way of creating temperature sensations in virtual reality, in fact using an illusion that's about 52 times more efficient than Peltier elements. However, it is still an illusion still. So right now, the range of sensations is quite limited, but this opens up a new venue of researching synthetic compounds for these temperature receptors. For example, isolin, that's a synthetic compound for the TRPM8 cold receptor, is about 50 times colder than menthol and also has no odor. Another consideration is just that these kinds of sensations are tied directly with the user's breathing. And users sometimes might unconsciously alter their breathing to avoid exposure to certain compounds. At the moment, the sensation is pretty much limited and localized to the face, but several participants actually expressed that it spread to the chest. Finally, this does allow a very neat and simple upgrade for olfactory displays to render not only odors, but also temperatures. And this extends beyond VR context to mobile and augmented reality ones as well. Now, while this illusion has a lot of promise, we're excited to explore it at other locations to create richer thermal experiences. So I'd like to thank my collaborators again. First, my colleague Stephen Noggles, and then my advisor Pedro Lopez. Thank you for your attention, and I'll answer your questions now.
Thank you very much, Jas. It was a fantastic research presentation, and I love the paper, the ideas, and everything. And I think there are some questions, but also Jas is answering Pedro as well in the chat in parallel. What I would like to do is sort of summing up all the main questions and topics that are coming as a challenge working with smell, and it's fascinating all these subconscious. So is it important that we are aware what we are smelling, that we need to be able to label what we are kind of perceiving, even though we know that this is affecting us in any case? Of course, it's opening up when we are talking about design interaction, a lot of questions on ethics, because maybe we are being exposed to odorants we are not aware, and therefore we can be misleading information, even in the worst cases. But sometimes this kind of subliminal effect can be fantastic. I mean, the example of Jas, I have a question for you. I know in the paper you're discussing some potential application, but as you know, the trigeminal nerves is also the nerves of pain mainly. Mm-hmm. So usually, and is kind of giving you immediately the trigger of feeling pain, and is connecting very much on the survival kind of instinctual. Okay, there is something that is bad. I'm just curious to know how your participants were reacting. They were all like comfortable with this kind of stimuli, or was just like a bit too intense? But I leave the word to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we adjusted all the compounds. So this is kind of in relation to Carlos's question as well about like matching the intensity of stimuli. We adjusted all the compounds so that they wouldn't be perceived necessarily as like searing pain. And this is especially applicable to the warm receptor. Because in the end, we use capsaicin, which activates the TRPV1 channel, and that's for temperatures 43 degrees Celsius and above in the skin. There are, however, other compounds that we're like interested in exploring that would activate like the TRPV3, and that wouldn't necessarily read as pain as like very, very hot sweltering pain, as much as like a warmth. And so playing around with these gradations of different TRPV like stimulants is probably going to help with that. And then on the second note, we took that into consideration just by adjusting the quantity of each of them so that they never pass things like a cough threshold, or people inhaling them are feeling okay and comfortable at all times. And that was especially in user study 1 that we focused on that. Yeah. We didn't have that kind of reaction for cold ones, if anyone's interested. People were totally happy with that one.
I mean, this is again very much connected with the subjectivity and individualism of everyone is experiencing, and it's fascinating how also the pain perception can be along a scale, a continuum. For someone can be painful and someone not. So it's all fascinating and challenging at the same time. There are some questions in the chat. Let me see if we can answer some. There are a bit more generic questions asked by Paul from Dubai. Would it be possible for people who can smell that they can smell again? This is kind of an analytic question. It depends. It really depends on why you are not smelling. Yeah. If it's kind of a pathology, some injuries of the nervous system. Now we're assisting with the COVID-19, a big momentum, unfortunately, of temporary smell loss, and we still try to understand the reason why. But I would like just to close somehow with Jas, because I think this is opening up a lot of opportunities, and by connecting again with your paper talking about the anosmic people are not able to smell, is an interesting speculation to think that maybe potentially they can perceive this trigeminal stimulation, because as we know there are several kind of two separate system in somehow that we can discern. So what do you think, how you are thinking potentially to apply these to the current situation, for instance?
Yeah. This was actually exactly like one of the things that we're really excited about is when you look at like historically the research related to smell, researchers like Fresnelli or Doty, they tend to use anosmic populations as a control group to actually isolate the data specifically to like the olfactory bulb, but based on the idea that like, oh, whatever trigeminal stimulation is happening, they're going to catch only that. And so it kind of opens up like a whole venue, like you're saying, of experiences that could be made in some sense like olfactory experiences, and I put quotation marks in like the video, that are accessible because they're not olfactory in some sense, but they are inhaled experiences that they can hopefully experience sense as well. And we've been like looking at that a lot more for future projects as well.
Sorry, I was muted. Fantastic, thank you. And I have like some final question for everyone, is also connected with the question from Kaixin now, is about the future. So as I said, along this kind of symposium, along the chat, some private messages, what is coming out is basically all the main areas of challenges we're working with smell. One of these, of course, is also the technology. What we use to diffuse smell can also change the perception of the smell, as we've seen with Andrea. The methodology you're using can impact then the flow control and therefore the intensity perception. So, and these are totally connected what we can define as adaptation, or how long the smell stay in a room. So it's creating all these negative effect of saturation in the room, and you don't know how to get rid of different smells around. And then again, back to this subjectiveness, how we can design something that is as visual. So we know there are standards around that, and then there is kind of a on the distribution, a variation of people they can smell in certain way and have differentiation. Of course, there are all kind of open questions, and we cannot have an answer today, but I would like to go back to the speakers and they want to think about the future of the research proposal, how they want to can continue, change, thinking about technology as well. And as we know, human-computer interaction is part of how we will use then all these kind of fascinating results and study implementing real-world scenario situation. We can start whatever want to talk. Maybe Jas is here in front of me, so you can start if you want.
Sure. I think like some of I think Yana Gita's paper is a really great one. If anyone's interested after this, I can post it. That kind of goes over an overview of like a bunch of different systems, like technology systems. And for example, in our paper, that's evident is that the technology completely impacts what we can actually produce, like its effects. We couldn't have cotton wicks because we didn't want to like filter out the capsaicin, for example. And we have like Everclear specifically for the same reason that Judith was talking about, which is that we want all the liquids to have a low viscosity point. And people have been starting to explore things like embedding heater elements into transducers to also lower the viscosity of certain like liquids so that they can like be outputted. I'll hand it over to anyone else.
Andrea, you want to take it from here?
Sure. So we did look at a number of different techniques for displaying olfactory information to the user in our theoretical paper, and we opted for the ultrasonic diffuser technique, but that does have the problem of leaving these residual odorants in the air. There was one really interesting paper where, and I can't remember the citation for this right now, but where the authors directly stimulated with electrodes the epithelial tissue of their sinus cavities, and that's a really intrusive way of displaying olfactory signals to the user, but it does have the benefit of not leaving that residual odorant in the air. If there's a less intrusive way of doing that, that might be a really cool direction to take this, to avoid the issue of that contamination of previously displayed information.
If I will just add something about like stimulating directly the epithelium is kind of, we don't know what we are doing because we don't know still yet which receptor are reacting and how we smell, why, if it's the chemical shape, the vibration of the molecule. So it's a fascinating kind of future of sci fiction world, but unfortunately
there are a lot of problems
far away. Yeah, but
like the resolution is sorry.
Yeah. No. I mean, I'm more than happy. I mean, we are here to discuss about all these challenges, and we all know. I see Judith after, so you can just comment on that future, like just personally what you are thinking about your future direction in the research, like in the real application. So how you see your technology then taken to a real world.
Yeah, well, actually, I added in the chat, there is a paper that recently came out, I think it was this week, in Science, where they do olfactory stimulation in rats using optogenetics. So I mean, that's completely invasive and it's with rats, but like I think like if we think like science fiction, I think that's probably the future, right? Like digitally create these smells, because I mean, dealing with with the prototypes that we built, even I was thinking about the materials that we use for printing, for example. We don't really talk too much about this in the community, but I found that if you want to use a prototype for a really long time, the 3D printing materials that we use, they dissolve over time. So the kind of studies that we do in HCI are very like maybe 1 week or like 1 day, but not like throughout like a really long time. And then if you go into the direction of like making something that can last for a really long time, you have to do injection molding, which is very expensive. So I think it would be great to collaborate with material scientists as well, or people, for example, Stephanie Muller, one of her students, is presenting later, I believe. So they do a lot of fabrication. Maybe it would be interesting to talk to them as well about, how to innovate in that. Yeah, so just some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for the link to the paper. Yeah, it was really published 10 days ago, and I've been reading that, and it's of course like a step forward as a research understanding, and as you say, it's a bit too invasive for doing it with humans at the moment, but who knows where we go. But of course there are so many research kind of pushing that direction, so luckily soon we will have kind of better understanding how the receptor is working, and then really we can create categories and then define kind of a common standard. What does it mean to smell a rose? We know there can be a basic chemical compounds element, but which are the component they are defining what is a smell. I'm trying to talk and read to the chat, but I will finish the turn of all the presenters, so I'm missing Dmitry. Dmitry, if you want to add something on this discussion point.
Yes, talking about future directions, I think in my case, it's more straightforward in terms of having a confined space. So if we are diffusing a scent in the vehicle, then we have air conditioning system that can take this contaminated air out of the space and also refresh the air inside the cabin. There are also air compressors that can supply compressed air. However, there is also an issue of containing the scent that is about to be diffused. Yeah, we all know that cars can become very hot if we park them under the sun, or they can go into -degrees if we are in cold temperatures. And that is not really good, particularly for liquid odorants. So there is a challenge of similar to what Judith is facing and what Jas and Andrea have explained as well. So yeah, we still need to figure out what's the best technology for containing the scent in a stable shape, so to say, for a long time, and then also to exchange it perhaps when it doesn't smell as nice anymore, or we want to replace it with a different scent. And yeah, Carlos had a very nice question on that. This is something we definitely need to investigate in the future.
Manuela, we cannot.
Sorry, I was mute. Yeah, exactly. So I would say thank you, Dmitry, for your answer. And I just really want to somehow picture how you see your future in this kind of research. I mean, I know personally Dmitry because we are from the same lab, but I really would like to see, even though we know there are several challenges, and probably this symposium is actually a call to do interdisciplinary research, because we know we need to have a broader view from a neuroscientific perspective, what is really happening, then a chemical perspective, and then a science material perspective, and so many other technicality and chemistry perspective, because we want to go down in the single molecular materials and understand it. So probably today can be a fantastic day to try to work more together and try to achieve a better kind of overview of all the challenges and try to collaborate. And there was also some magician that was texting in the chat. So as you see, like there are a lot of real application. It's not just pure science or just pure research, but the reason why I love so much scents, because they are all around us. We are constantly influenced by what we are smelling, and it's changing, impacting so much our behaviors, that is so important to try to control in somehow, but design some meaningful implementation application that people then can really use in everyday interaction. Then I will drop back, and I would like that really each of you presenter can say something about your future direction from this paper, or just during your studies, or what you embase on the research ideas you have because I see Jas as a first, then we can move in the same order of before. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been very interesting just kind of looking at what kind of sensations can we produce via the trigeminal nerve and how can we produce them. So that's been the main leading question for the future work that we're doing. And some of the discussions are actually relevant. I don't want to spoil too much. I don't know how much we're supposed to say in these kinds of situations. But
don't go in details,
yeah,
just like a broad idea.
I think the broad idea in this case would be the idea of how do we create anosmic accessible experiences is probably what I would say. It's, I think, you know,
this is fantastic, like compensating, all the emotional loss we have when we cannot smell. And there is a nice comment from Carlos Velasquez about the whiskey perception and the trigeminal stimulation. It's interesting line of research as well. And there are like these big questions now coming over you guys, from Olivia and then upgraded from Pedro as well. What is the future of smell? So Andrea, you want to say something?
The future of smell. In terms of information olfactation, I would say that it's mainly in conveying information for slow moving or gradual process, things that are sort of ambient to the analytical process, but that don't require immediate visual attention. And an example of that, I think, was in Kay's thesis of the case of mint representing a market upturn in some stock analysis firm.
Joe Fish thesis,
yeah.
It was a case study.
Yes, and so I think that's a really solid direction for olfactory displays in terms of information olfactation. So that's really the context that I'm concerned with.
Yeah, this is kind of great and fantastic because it goes in the direction to design for more accessibility. Like when we have sensory impaired, they can be visually impaired, auditory impaired. It's so important to try to exploit all the potential that smell can have.
Exactly.
And as you say, work in a different attention level. There is not like the visual space, and neither we are bombarded by audio-visual information constantly, even more interaction with the virtual environment, for instance. But now that we are all locked in our kind of houses, we are spending all the day in front of a screen, and we are completely missing how we can interact with each other using sense, for instance. This is already another challenge for the future, how we can really create devices of technology that can be used in the house as a single user. And I can drop now the ball to Judith.
Yes, so I've been always very interested in the effects of smell, and not only like kind of like the technology, but especially for medical applications. So for me, I'm actually finishing my PhD hopefully this year, and I'm gonna do a postdoc at the Harvard Medical School. So my hope is to actually look more into some of these technologies. How can we apply them in more like in medicine, and trying to just like in places that otherwise it would be impossible. There's one application that I was mentioning, for example, when women are giving birth, how can we maybe like have like some sort of like device that maybe could also reduce pain perception, or like how we can use this for traumas. So like kind of like reactivating the memories. I'm very interested in all the area of like emotion and memory, and having these closed loop systems where they can monitor your physiological signals and then release smell accordingly. So for me, I think it's just kind of like, I think Carlos was talking about multidisciplinary research. I think that's kind of like my future, trying to work with people that are completely from a different field. So that's kind of where I'm hoping to go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think also is the kind of the key turning point to collaborate cross-disciplinary. Otherwise, we can somehow solve some challenges. It can be technical, but then we are still missing some other answers while working together. Collaborating is this should be kind of the aim. So thank you again, Judith. Dmitry, you want to add something or we'll be discussing?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the future directions for myself, I would really love to see some of my work in real cars on the roads. And from having spoken with colleagues from the industry, I see that it's coming, and there are already some prototypes or products available. I think many colleagues in the automotive industry agree that automotive industry has been a lot about performance all the time. You know, you need to have a faster car, bigger car, more spacious car, whatever. But now there is a transition into experience, that you don't just drive fast or drive off-road, but you experience it with all your senses. And I really hope that this direction will grow further, and some of my findings will find an application in that. But coming back to the overall question on what's the future of smell, well, I think it is coming. We have seen some prototypes in VR, in gaming contexts. Maybe quite a few of you heard about nozzleless Rift, which was a bit of a funny application, but I think it is a real thing. It was demonstrated. I don't think that mimicking one particular scent that is used in the game or in the VR experience is really the future. My hope is that we will go into things like arousal and valence dimensions, that we will try to match the scent with an emotional level of the visual or tactile experience, perhaps. So that's how I see it in the future, and hopefully it will really work this way.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. I don't know if anyone in the public want to ask any question. I'm also happy to open the mic if someone is now in Zoom event. I really enjoy all the discussion, as we see, Dmitry also said, it's nice to try to go in a simplified version of our emotional reaction it is. And then we come back on the other challenges like cultural differences, how we can really arrive to define something is pleasant overall. And probably the solution is really going to single molecular elements instead of just having a mixture, or who knows, maybe not, maybe it's not the ideal. Maybe always putting this kind of cross-cultural filter, like we do research in UK, we have a kind of very varied background of participants, but sometimes there are like dominant cultures. So we know that with the results we are presented, they are always biased in some direction as well. So all this complexity we need to take in account when we are working with smell. It's much more than visual, because research and advancement has been done in the past. Jas, Pedro, I don't know if you want to add something, or I mean, I can keep going, talking and discussing about the challenges and the problem, but I really would like to hear some other questions, someone else asking, or just like a final conclusion of the symposium.
Yeah, so you can all hear me, right?
Yeah.
I can add. So just keep in mind, everyone, we have 2 more sessions. And as for the smell session, we still have a little bit of time. If you want to ask another question, feel free to either on Zoom raise your hand, and then Emanuela can unmute you. You can ask yourself, or you can keep typing it and engaging with the speakers. But also to say that I'm seeing, like as Joe was saying, I'm seeing 100 people on a Zoom chat talking about smell, and that gets me very excited. So also, if this is something that we'd like to see in the future, go talk to Jas and go talk to the other organizers and session chairs. And we can all do this if we want to, right? We can go to CHI 2021 or any other place and keep doing this and keep engaging and doing research together, not just separately, which I think is very important for us as well. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro. Thank you very much. We have a question here from Miguel. He's asking if anyone here is like doing research using olfactory displays in video games, and then I give you again just the word to you.
Yeah, I guess I don't. It's I don't necessarily do research directly in video games, like producing research in that vein or those kinds of journals. But I've done collaborations with friends and exactly like artists that are where we could do kind of like immersive experiences. I know that Emanuela and Dmitrijs also done that, where we do like VR with smell, or there's more recently like a game experience where we've been collaborating on odors, for example. So yeah, I guess my answer is just not research specific though.
Yeah. So yeah, I like personally and with the lab, we've been supporting mainly artists to do immersive experiences using sense and odor diffusion as a new storytelling modality. So they have this kind of layer of complexity. It was not just typical audiovisual, and we've been working with some artists in US and UK based. And I see now the chat is coming out with question. Can you give me the names, links of those artists? Yes, I will be more than happy, or everyone will be more than happy. You can drop me an email also, Bruno, or sometimes you can go in the website of our lab and you can see the collaboration and the research proposal we are working, or we've been working in the past. Okay, Leah has a very long question. I recognize that most of the study introduces scent, but only heard one study that focused on olfactory informatics, which were not involved. Sorry, it's going away. I'm asking for the So yeah, so Leah has this question about how robust we are in understanding and labeling the smell, having an emotional reaction as a common. I can comment on that. There are some generalization. We can generalize. For instance, there are some very bad smell. They are kind of rotten fish. They are generally perceived as unpleasant because it's a connotation. And this is interesting because it's opening up what we culturally learn about something. So we associate a smell with an object that is emitting the sense. And we build up the emotional connection to that. But as Jas study and Pedro shows that sometimes this kind of association can go and work in a different level, that is the olfactory representation as such, but is more physiological reaction as a trigeminal reaction. Or we have another very fascinating system, it is a kind of contradiction in the scientific field, is the vomeronasal system, and this the system is reacting to biochemical signal between humans, and we know we are impacting. There is like this amazing research center in Israel run by Sobel, Professor Sobel. They are trying to understand this kind of communality. So we are seeing someone crying, and then through the smell of the tears, we can reduce the production of testosterone. This is kind of fascinating, and is a kind of universal. So my answer is like certain emotional reaction are more cultural based and personal based, as Dmitry presented in the paper. How we perceive the smell are connected with the long-term memories. So everything is stored in our brain, and we can rewritten this history and change in the association with a smell, but again, it's very personal. So we need to kind of go over and try to understand which are the basic, as I say, maybe chemicals or elements. And again, we don't need to think about labeling the smell or the sense or the chemical substance we are using, because if we put a label, means that we know what is it, and we have like so much association, and this is also the difficulties. I have a lot of thread in the chat, but I cannot answer to everyone, and I will answer privately to anyone else, but please drop me an email. I think you have my email through the website of the lab, and I think it was really interesting and fascinating, and I hope everyone enjoyed. I don't know if we have much time more, but as Pedro said, I'm coming from a different kind of research environment. I'm an experimental psychologist, and then I moved to human-computer interaction. So I'm still building up my network of people, and I know working in olfactory space, we have such a big research group around the world. So yes, this is a call to be multidisciplinary and just let's collaborate to get the best out of our knowledge and putting together to move forward this so important and fascinating field.
That's it. Thanks everyone for the first session. Jas, you want to remind everyone of the schedule very briefly?
Yeah, so just as a quick reminder for people, there's going to be a break right now until 1:30 p.m. CDT, which is Chicago time, when the temperature session is going to kick off. People can feel free to like stick around here and use like the chat feature if they want. I'm going to go get some water because I'm incredibly thirsty. But I am really excited. I know that there's some people also in the audience who are super relevant to the questions that are being asked. So if you are hearing me right now and you see something that's really relevant to you, definitely answer them. I know that there's some people that do like qualitative measures of immersion in virtual reality with smell, and other people that work in olfactory displays like Matsukura. Amazing work. So I'm also just like freaking out because people are in the audience. So yeah. But yeah, so that's it on my end. Thank you.
That's it. Yeah. Stick around, 1:30 time Chicago, convert that to your time zone. We come back with a temperature session. We have more amazing papers for all of you, and Roshan Perez, who's a total expert in this, is going to lead that session. Hard to fill the shoes of Emanuela. She's a really good moderator. Thank you for that. But he can do it too. So see you all in a little bit. Grab what kind of ever food makes you cold or hot, and that would be perfect for that session. So go do that. We're going to do that as well.
Thank you again, Jas and Pedro, for organizing. This is a really fantastic symposium and conversation.